So, one of the focus for today, I know you ran a campaign for money is plural, and I want to dive into that a little bit. We hear this conversation all the time of stablecoin fragmentation, and the more stablecoins that launch are is going to be a net negative for the space. And I feel like you, especially in M0, would lean on the complete opposite side. And so what does the plurality of money mean to you?
Yeah, actually, the way that we look into this, thanks for asking that question because I love talking about it. I think there's some philosophical and some like concrete elements about that. And there are two very different versions of the world. And obviously, there are interests behind seeing those versions of the world manifest themselves. The concrete side of it first, and then I'll get back to the more philosophical one. The concrete side of it is that if you ignore stablecoins for a second, just think about the world, the way that traditional finance works and the way the money architecture works for traditional finance. We live in an extremely fragmented world, right? So
Mm,
we keep talking about this. I think we discussed with you guys before, but if you think about commercial banking, let's stick just with the US, right? The US has like with 4 and 5,000 banks. Each version of the dollar in each one of those banks is a different version of the dollar. It's practically speaking a private version commercially issued by banks that have a license to do so of the national currency. But they're different. I mean, if you're holding Chase dollars in a balance in Chase, in JP Morgan Chase, just think of the risk and how thinking about the risk, like I think explains the difference to people. Think of the risk that you have, right? Probably very low, like JP Morgan Chase, a super solid institution, has a lot of protections. Now imagine if you were holding that same amount of dollars, 3 years ago exactly 3 years ago in SVB, right? Like you can see the difference. Like those are not the same dollars. Like
mm,
they have different risk. They're essentially a liability of a company that has different size, like, different operations, different risk taking in terms of the business that they're accepting. So like that's not to say that one can fail, another one cannot fail. That's not the difference, but this is just one illustration to show that these dollars on different banks are physically different. And yet we don't index on fragmentation, right? We don't keep saying like, oh my God, we live in such a fragmented banking world and it's so bad. Why do we not index on that? Because there's good interoperability technology, right? So over decades and decades of building the financial system infrastructure, we have developed great ideas, things like central banks, right? Central bank is like effectively one of the roles that it plays. Instead, it's a key interoperability solution for the banking system, right? So you have these master accounts at the Fed. Fundamentally, when you move funds from one bank to another, you're destroying like balances on the master accounts and recreating on another account. Like that's effectively how it works. You have clearinghouses, you have all these payment rails, like all these make the fragmented versions of money that we experiment interoperable. And so for that reason, nobody complains about it, right? And fragmentation is not the evil thing like in traditional finance. You move that to stablecoins, then you move that to digital money. And we evolved, and all the industries, they evolved. You can look back and you can talk about history, but it evolved in a different way. Up until now, we still don't have, M0 is trying to build, we don't have good interoperability technology for stablecoins. We just don't. Some people usually oppose my argument and they say, wait, but we have trading. And I'm like, yeah, trading is kind of a poor man's approach to interop, right? It's not really good. Like trading is very cost inefficient, is very capital intensive. Like just imagine for a second if we had trading as a way for interoperating commercial bank money, right? Where you go to a market and say, hey, I have 100 Chase dollars. How many Bank of America dollars do you get? That it would be super capital inefficient. You would have to have a lot of money parked. It would look like FX, right? It would look like FX, and FX as an interop is way less efficient than interoperability across like the banking system in a single country. But there's a need for interoperability. Use cases, you need to traverse funds across use cases. So what did it lead to in the stablecoin world? Concentration, right? So there's a huge kind of magnet or gravity for people to continue to use USDT, for them to continue to use USDC, because if you do that, you're going to be interoperable with all these other use cases. And people want to interoperate, right? People want a network effect. So like, yeah, bring money from your use case to mine, and it'll all work well. However, that concentration has problems, right? I don't think any one of us would, if given the choice, opt for living in a concentrated world where we have, duopoly or maybe a few companies like owning the digital form of money for an entire industry versus, a much more plural world where companies can slap their brand to a digital instrument and deepen their relationship with their customers. I think everybody would choose the latter, but we don't have interoperability technology that's good enough for us to get there yet. I think this is the world that we need to live in. This is the more philosophical, side to the pitch. I think everybody should try. I mean, fragmentation is not an evil thing. Like, we live in fragmented
Mm.
worlds. Look around, right? Like cars. Like, cars is a very fragmented industry. People like different models.
EV
The
charging right
the
now
land
is
Exactly. But there are open standards for certain things, and open standards and interop facilitate fragmentation, and it doesn't become an evil thing. So just think about cars, for example, like the length of the wheels, like the chassis dimensions, like those things are standards, right? Like cars have more or less the same size because, you need to be able to park any car in any space. You need to be able to put them in a garage. So like people haven't invented, like a car with like 20 feet like distance between the wheels. That wouldn't make sense, right? That would break an interoperability standard. In the same way, like fueling, right? Like every car you go to a gas station is compatible to how you fuel with the gas station. So if you any industry in any sector of the world, if you think about standards and standards exist and these products can interoperate, then fragmentation is not a problem at all. And we should stop saying that it is an evil thing and sell it as an evil thing. People who sell it as an evil thing probably have an interest in maintaining a monopoly position.
Speaking of that, just last point there, who is in the best position without having to name names, but just what kind of business models do you think are inherently against this? Like the companies that are benefiting from those types of monopolies existing structurally, that I think it's just important to maybe categorize those or call those out. I think about in the car example, right? Like you have a Tesla who I know has been very, famous for doing everything in house. They've ruined even the idea of fragmentation because they try to own the entire stack of the chassis and the tech and the software, and it's all as much as possible by them. Like, do you see certain parts of this industry that are maybe inherently just like structurally opposed to this view that you think are just to help people think through the differences of those two business models? Not saying that those are inherently evil by any means, but what comes to mind there?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And good and evil, like these things are always relative, right? Like if you are in an evil company, you might think you're doing good and vice versa. So I'm definitely not gonna get into categorizing things as good or evil. I actually think there will be space for both approaches in the market, right? Because I think the way you guys know, I come from a product background. And when you're building a product, it's a very hard type of activity because there are always trade-offs in terms of thinking about how the user is going to approach your product. And convenience is a key word, right? Like people hate inconvenient products or inconvenient solutions. Like they will actually, like go over like certain things that are not maybe the best for them if it is the more convenient choice. Like things like, drinking soda or eating unhealthy food. Like the reason why a lot of people do that is sometimes just because it's right. It's easy, it's cheap, like things like that. And I think in financial services, there's actually a huge demand for convenience.
Hmm.
The financial services is super complicated, as you guys know. There are many different stacks. There are many different types of capabilities that you need depending on the business that you want to build. And sometimes people trade off, 5 service providers for one service provider that can give them the 5 capabilities instead, just because of convenience, right? Even if it is a little bit more expensive, even if it controls their business in a way that strategically is not ideal for them, they're still going to trade some of those things off for convenience, just for having, a single invoice at the end of the month, a single support channel that they need to call into and resolve issues. And I think that will not disappear. I think that will not ever disappear. So there are some companies that are clearly indexing on that, right? Some companies that you use the Tesla example very similarly, right? They want to own the payment rails that people are going to use. They want to own actually the digital dollar instrument that people are going to use. And maybe they want to own even the substrate, the blockchain that people are going to run these services on, right? They want to own the entire stack from top to bottom. That's going to be extremely appealing for a certain cohort of businesses. As I said, because it's super convenient, right? You have one neck to choke, as people say in financial services. have one provider to go for everything. However, there
I've never
in fintech,
heard that term. You have one neck to
you never
choke.
heard?
No.
That's an expression that comes. It's an expression that comes from regulation. Actually, regulators use that expression a lot. They're like,
It's
yeah. I
and
don't
that can
care
be
about
really
all the
great. Like,
providers. Give me one neck to choke.
yeah, that can be really important for a business, especially larger businesses who need that, you know?
Absolutely.
Joao, as
And the,
we
but there are certain brands, just to caveat the opposite, there are certain brands that actually do want to maintain, let's say, strategic control over the infrastructure, right? They don't want anybody between themselves and their end users. That is also a very large market. And those folks are going to say, no, we're going to specialize, right? For this capability, we're going to get the best provider there. So for payment rails, we're going to pick one provider. For the digital dollar instrument, we're going to pick another one. For the blockchain, we're going to be neutral, right? So there is also that segment in the market for people who are going to work with many providers.
Yeah, and I think you guys, you could sell, I think, into those providers as well. I think you guys sit at, I would argue, probably the most foundational level, which is something I just love about the M0 business model so much, that maybe despite what those approaches are, you can still be powering and equipping whichever philosophy people have with a really, really powerful issuance stack and interoperability stack. I guess last question here as we close, we have um, a green room on deck ready to go. I think this is important, especially right now. Any comments just on the you're selling into a lot of issuers. A lot of these issuers are in the hot seat or in a very direct position with regulation, holding reserves. How do you just generally think about where M0 sits in the regulatory conversation? I think we asked you about this right when Clarity was kind of getting hot. Genius was passed, or actually right before Genius was passed. You guys were very, very bullish on what that meant for the US. Like, how are you feeling about the regulatory conversation right now with Clarity?
Yeah, we're to feel very good. I think we're in it's so much better, the position that we are in the US in this industry compared to 2 years ago. We, to summarize what we do, right? M0 is kind of a two-sided platform, right? On the one side, we sell this amazing stablecoin issuance stack for issuers, right? So issuers like MoonPay, like One Money, like Bridge, they use our technology to be able to issue stablecoins, but issuers are the regulated entities, right? So the issuers, in the same way that they would be supervised if they didn't use M0 technology, they are responsible, as you said, for managing the reserves. They're responsible for, the reporting on these digital instruments that they issue. They're responsible for, any compliance that has to do with the usage of those instruments, KYC, AML, all those kinds of things. That doesn't change. The only thing that changes is that if they are powered by M0, they use the best software in the market, as it gives them capabilities to do reward distribution, multiple stablecoin extensions, multiple, customization, anything they want to do for their clients. Then on the other side, these brands that are building these stablecoins, we tell them that, it's better for them to leverage the M0 standard. Again, this has to do with what we were talking about before. In a fragmented world, you need some standards to allow for interoperability to exist. So every one of these brands building digital dollar on top of M0, whether it's MetaMask, Exodus, USDAI, they all build from a common set of functionality. And then all the software on all these issuers that are powered by M0, they kind of quote unquote understand those stablecoins. And for that reason, these stablecoins can move between these use cases being interoperable. This interoperability side, there's no regulation kind of supervising that, right? The regulation that we have seen to date has been concentrated on the issuance side. I think Clarity, hopefully the main thing, Clarity, doesn't impact us as much as, the conversation around the yield distribution for stablecoin issuers. I think that is the part that obviously we're very interested in, because we do think issuers should be able to distribute yield. That's the primary way that they're going to have a commercial relationship with the brands, right? The reason why a brand would go and issue their own digital instrument is partially because they can monetize those customer balances, and that comes from getting the yield from the issuer. So we think it's really important that that's, legal and a very kosher and normal thing to do. Outside of that, I think the role, we don't play so much of a supervised role because, we're a tech platform, but we would love to continue to engage with regulators to talk more about this interoperability side of things. Because I think if regulators also wrap their head the lack of interoperability and, the monopolistic or duopolistic like environment that we ended up in the stablecoin sector, I don't think regulators are big fans of that. Regulators essentially like competition. They like, a free market, and I think they will be pro interoperability. But I don't think this is for the short term. I think there's a lot of development of technology that needs to happen before we're able to sit in front of, these folks and say, here's how the world could be, and it would actually be better for end users. I think we'll get there in a few years.
Awesome. You guys are definitely seeing everything from the front lines, and we're thankful to be in it with you. And is Luca and team there with you this week as well? Or are you riding solo at ETH Denver?
I'm riding solo, just me and Tony, our CTO, and we're back in New York next week all together.
Cool, man. Well, Joao, thanks for the time. It's always a pleasure.